example, in the case of Vietnam, it simply didn't pay off. So I think we had, to answer your question, I think we had business being over there, we had business trying. It failed. The fact that it failed does not mean necessarily we shouldn't have been there in the first place. Now, I mean, all right, one of you did a paper where you stated that the United States has no business getting involved in other people's affairs, and one of you who's not here at the moment, that the United States should straighten out its home first before trying to straighten out anyone else, all of which is somewhat true. And we have made a bunch of enemies abroad by trying to straighten out some of our foreign country. Oh yeah, this person's particularly cited Iraq, that the United States had no business getting involved in Iraq. You can believe that if you want to.
But that is true, because the United States is very much all about self-determination, sovereignty. In Vietnam particularly,
they voted communist in.
Yeah, that's right.
If they had been allowed to vote, they would have voted communist
right.
in.
And that's their choice.
That was their choice.
And it's not right for the United States to come and say, well, no, we're going to partition you. I mean, how would the United States feel if another country came in and said, we're going to partition you?
That is an extremely good point. I'm not going to argue with it.
It doesn't work that way.
If you're strongly set in your own ideology, though, but again, keep in mind the other ideology, communism, kills millions of people everywhere it's been tried.
That's something that people decide if they want to make that statement.
Okay, anyway, you have
Also, like, you know, like you're saying, the United States do go and get involved in other people's business. Who comes over to help us?
Well, when we have an earthquake, nobody helps us.
But like, as far
When we
as
have a tornado, nobody helps us.
So why are we in other countries in the first place?
But that's
Because our
Point
foreign,
blank period, how are we in I understand the whole fact of how America.
because our foreign policy is incredibly stupid.
It is incredible.
It's
stupid.
very
And I don't
poor.
understand why we're in other places when people don't even give two craps about America. They look at America from
You-
the side.
I'll tell you,
They're looking
part
at
of
America
it,
from the
with
side.
all respect,
and they don't
you-
want our economy to collapse. All of a sudden, the whole world from the economy is going to collapse. But guess what? The rest of the world's going to bounce right back up, and America's going to be there, sitting there like a stump on a log, waiting for us, someone to come help us out. No one's going to come help America out.
Nobody's going to help America out when America falls. That is very, very true.
so why are we still getting involved in other?
Okay, I started to answer that. A lot of it has to do with economics. I mean, yeah, people act like, oh, we went to war over oil. The fact of the matter is,
prison and military. That's it.
to put together, folks, some little bitty something. I mean, hi, to put together some little cheap device like this remote control car, it takes, probably comes, the parts inside probably come from 50 different places. But don't we have enough, well, not to put together billions of things like this. So even some little cheap item like this, the parts come from this part of the world, that part of the world, and we're just interdependent on each other.
Right.
And if one part of the world decides that they're going to not play the game,
That's their call. You know, it's just
Well-
it's so hypocritical when, you know, Obama says something like, in the 21st century, you just don't, you know, particularly with Crimea, you don't redraw borders with force and things like that. And it's like there's so many things that we do that are not 21st century. Let's be honest.
well, everybody, something on your mind. Yeah, I read this statement many years ago. War is inherently evil, and it has evil on both sides. And if the one side will always look the other side, look how evil they are, and then but they're looking back at you and saying, look how evil you are. War has evil on both sides.
I don't think it's evil. I think it's just matters of shades of gray.
A lot of it
Because
is
it's all about your own interests. That's why I'm kind of
your
on the
interest,
fence.
your economics, and
That's
you
why I'm
can't
on-
pretend that economics is not there.
No, I get why the United States does stuff like invade Vietnam or this, that, and the other, because it's also in their interest to do that. It
Oh, yes.
benefits them. But then, by that same token, you can't go and slate another country for doing the exact same thing and then encouraging all of the Western Hemisphere to go, you know exactly what I'm talking
It's
about.
a
It doesn't work
consistency.
that way. You know, Russia does
It's
have the right.
inconsistency, pure and simple. Now, again, give you an example of the inconsistency. When Saddam Hussein tried to take over Kuwait, the whole world moved in.
Yep.
But now he was a little man trying to take over a smaller country. But now you get Russia trying to take over another country, and the whole world's going to stay out. In other words, a lot of the morality depends on the size of the country that's trying to do lead.
But they didn't, you can't even really say they did. Crimea had a referendum.
They had a
and they
referendum in
voted,
which
that was their choice.
They
said
made the
wanted to be part
choice.
of Russia.
Actually, I don't want to argue, I do agree. Crimea made the choice, and I really think the United States is going to find itself on the wrong side of the issue.
Oh, they'll definitely be on the wrong.
Wrong
There's going to
side.
be a lot of things.
If
they've done
America
to
just
our
doesn't
system.
sit down and just shut up and just watch and stop letting people, oh, America help us. No, you're not gonna help us, so why should we help you? That should be America's mindset.
Yeah.
Instead of America trying to like, oh, what is they doing? Oh, what is Russia doing? Russia needs to stop. No, if we just shut up and worry about our own self, we really will come out so much better.
That's what we did in 1956
But we're
with
not doing
Hungary,
that in
1980 with
2014.
Poland, 1960 with Czechoslovakia. We just let the Russians have them. And eventually, the problem solved itself.
Exactly. So why
Yeah,
are we
because
worried about it?
by 1990, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, Romania, all of them told the Soviet Union, go home and stay home.
Self-determination.
And they did it without any help from the United States. Now, another country I'm going to mention, Indonesia, got rid of communism. They slaughtered 100,000 communists and did it without 1 ounce of help from the United States. But they solved their own problems. I don't want to argue.
I mean, yeah, but you only have to look here in the history of the United States to know that we used to do that as well. Like, the Civil War.
Oh, yeah, we...
To a lesser extent, the Revolution, because the French did help us. But,
Yeah.
by and large, those are our problems. They stayed within, our country, and we situate them. But from then on, it just seems, we're meddling in other countries' affairs. It's just ridiculous.
All right,
Especially when you
And we're
consider
not the
anyone else?
peacekeeper of the entire world.
Anyone else? We can't police the entire world. Good point. All right, I'll move on. Brezhnev took over the Soviet Union after Khrushchev was deposed. Now, he didn't. There were some smaller, lesser leaders. Yes,
Let's go there.
Brezhnev, Brezhnev. He didn't take over right away, but the way the Soviet system has worked, when a leader dies or is ousted, there's a power struggle that sometimes lasts a few years, and eventually one man winds up coming out on top, usually the most absolute ruthless among them. Brezhnev denounced Khrushchev's softness, and he tried to return to Stalinism.
Did you tell us that the last few letters of their name meant something like that?
Generally, that EV means son of. Yeah, Romanov, son of the Romans. Yeah, EV, it's the name for son of, or of the family of. Yeah, a lot of Russian names end in a, or VE. He was famous for his policy of détente, which was a Russian term that meant we're going to try to get along. It's comparable to Khrushchev's peaceful coexistence. In other words, you be yourself, we'll be ourself, and we'll get along. But détente largely broke down in 1979. Don't know about the year, but basically the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Now, you can read what your book says about why, but I'll tell you a little bit why. The Soviet Union was not after Afghanistan's wealth or so much, but basically they were looking after their own interest. Actually, Russia had tried to get involved in Afghanistan for centuries, and every nation from the outside that has invaded Afghanistan has always lost. And I say that tongue-in-cheek because the United States has invaded Afghanistan about 13 years ago, and we're still there. Every nation that invaded Afghanistan had lost, including the Soviet Union. Britain tried in the 1850s, but essentially your book says why they invaded was Islam was starting to rise up again and starting to practice terrorism, and also in the Soviet Union, a high percentage of their republics, there are 16 republics, a high percentage were Islamic or Muslim. And the Soviet Union was afraid that Muslims from Afghanistan would come in and infiltrate and encouraged the people in these republics to rise up. And now I'm going to fast forward to 2014. I have heard that 50% of the Russian army today is Muslim. Now, if any of you have heard different or no different, I've heard that. 50%. All right, if you don't think so, you're welcome to say so. But I mean, anyway, the Soviets were very concerned, and so they installed a communistic government in Afghanistan, and the communistic government could not maintain a firm hold. So to keep this government in power, because they felt like the communist government worked more in the interest of the Soviet Union, so they invaded. Now, the Afghan war lasted 8 years, and it proved to be a Vietnam for the Soviet Union. And after 8 years of fighting, the Soviet resources were completely drained, and the Soviet Union simply collapsed under the weight of its own excesses and fell apart. But a lot of the blame goes to their invasion of Afghanistan, where I joined the National Guard shortly before the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. And we would talk about the Afghan war, and we'd say tomorrow we're all going off to Afghanistan, even though none of us, as far as I know, ever did. But they would tell us at our meetings that the Afghan war was a dirty war where no prisoners were taken. Everybody who was captured was executed right on the spot. The Soviet Union was playing just as dirty as were the Afghanis. And also the Afghan war showed that there was some serious weaknesses in the Soviet army. Really serious weaknesses. I don't want to go into much detail here, but well, one weakness was they only moved when there was an officer. Well, what if the officer was killed? And everybody went into a defensive position and waited for the officer. In our army, the man who was highest in rank or highest senior would take over. But also, Soviet young men had seldom played with radios and seldom played with TVs. They tried to fix lawnmowers and didn't know about automobiles like American young men did. So basically, they were not as well trained as ours, but it showed that their army simply could not function in that type of environment. Again, after 8 years, the Soviets pulled out of Afghanistan, but it was too late. The Afghan war had drained them, and basically, again, the United States did not get involved because of the so-called Vietnam syndrome, where that we vowed we'll never get involved in another Vietnam war. Soviet Union did not practice the same thing. They watched us get involved in Vietnam, then they turned around and did the same thing themselves. All right. After Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan became president. Now, I do hope you'll remember the names of these presidents. I mean, there was Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan. I'll stop here for now. Anyway, Ronald Reagan visited the, I'll back up a little bit. Ronald Reagan started a big arms race with the Soviet Union. Reagan said that under former presidents, the military had been allowed to deteriorate. And I know from having worked at working at Lockheed, Lockheed prospered really well under Reagan's administration. We started building more C-5s, heavy, big cargo carrying planes. Anyway, the Soviet Union tried to keep up with the arms race. Their economy was just simply not strong enough, and eventually they collapsed. And the Soviet Union collapsed because simply they could not keep up with the pace at which the United States was building up its armaments, its airplanes, its missiles, its tanks. And Ronald Reagan insisted that the troops receive better training, and basically he wanted to prove to the world that the United States is more ready to fight than the Soviet Union. And a lot of Ronald Reagan's admirers will say he's the man who brought down the Soviet Union. I'll give my own opinions on that, because Pope John Paul II, his admirers say Pope John Paul II brought down the Soviet Union. Britain's admirers can say Margaret Thatcher contributed. Maybe all these people contributed. In my mind, The real people who brought down the Soviet Union were Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, and Brezhnev.
What about Gorbachev?
Gorbachev too, yeah, you can include him in that, yeah. Even though, I hate to say that, because Gorbachev was more our kind of man than anyone else. But in the Soviet system, the more low down and mean the man was, the better he survived, and the nicer guys always finished last. Hey, yes, you heard me say that. Do I like saying it? No. But under that kind of system, it was true under the czars. You get a mild-mannered czar, he was always rebelled against. The czars that survived were the ones who seemingly lacked any scruples about killing and maiming and destroying. Khrushchev tried to reform and they ousted him. Gorbachev tried to reform and the whole Soviet system broke up. Now, Ronald Reagan, among another one of his policies was a defense system called Star Wars. It was named after a movie that was very popular at the time, the Star Wars movie, which some of you might have had the privilege of seeing, even though you younger folk, I don't know. But anyway, now, the idea of Star Wars was to put a bunch of missiles in orbit to where they'd already be, you might say, in the air, and they would stay there. And then when the time came to be needed, they could send these missiles to any target they wanted to, but these missiles could be remote controlled from Earth. And of course, if you know anything about orbiting, anything in orbit goes 5 miles a second. And you'd have to have several of them up there so that at least one of them would be in position to where if you want to hit, let's say you want to hit the target near Moscow, you could simply decide quickly which one's the best, on the best course right now, best position to hit Moscow, and then slow down. The Star Wars initiative never got off the ground, but it was something that Reagan tried to push and pull for. They finally decided, no, we're better off we put these missiles on submarines or on tanks or even on airplanes rather than in space. One thing would be much cheaper, and also
was that even feasible?
Huh?
The Star Wars plan, was that even feasible?
The idea was to be able to strike its enemy if we were attacked.
Right, I mean actually putting missiles in orbit.
It really wasn't feasible.
Technology was.
No. For one thing, technology changes to where anything you buy, anything they'd put in orbit in 1980 or 1985 would by now be just hopelessly, totally obsolete. Just like, well, we put a telescope in orbit, and of course the first thing we found out was out of focus. Well, we eventually we had to keep sending astronauts up into space to upgrade it, revamp it, and upgrade it some more, using better technology. But anything we'd have put there would have been obsolete, and of course, but it was impractical. Now, folk, those of you who are still here can laugh if you want to. I get a big laugh when I say this, but there have been persons who say that the real purpose of Star Wars was to protect the Earth if some aliens from some other planet, some other star system ever invaded, we'd have a chance to fight back. Because, all right, you can laugh if you want to. I mean, I'm not saying that's true, and like I say, the Star Wars plan never got off the ground.
Was that what people thought in the 80s?
There were persons who said just that. Oh yes, you have conspiracy people. Some of their ideas are far-fetched, and then sometimes you can't help but wonder. I mean, after all, communism was indeed a worldwide conspiracy. All right.